I maybe quibble with the idea that it was ever possible to prepare your children for the future. And maybe this is part of my background. I grew up in late Soviet Union as a kid, and then I saw that world collapse, and almost everybody in that society, 99% of the people in that society, were completely maladapted to the society that formed overnight. And so to me, the idea that it's actually possible to genuinely prepare your kids fully for the future, I think it's probably more about instilling a set of values and a set of principles. And then they're going to have to use their talents and their ingenuity to fend for themselves in a way. So I think it's more about, there's a certain set of red lines that we don't cross, and there's a certain set of things that we do in every circumstance, which is, we speak the truth when we can, et cetera, right? All of those things. And then you just leave them to it. I think I don't know that you're going to get them to be well adjusted to any world, because the world's constantly changing.
Well, but the problem is that's actually new, right? And I take your point about
what about the printing press? I mean, that transformed society.
I'm still uncertain about it. But look, first of all,
centuries of violent revolutions around the world.
Well, but here's the thing that I think is missing from this. Recent human history has had many of these violent upheavals. And I agree, every single one of those takes people who were adapted to something and throws them into some world they don't know. Okay. Humans are adapted to that. And in fact, I would argue that what we understand about PTSD tells us that human beings are adapted to make exactly one violent transition in a lifetime. Right. And that, when a soldier comes back from war is when they have their problem. Right. You can go from walking around a normal, stable civilization to being in a jungle and not knowing whether you're going to step into a booby trap or a sniper's going to pick you off. You can adapt to that reality, but it's very hard to turn off the part of your mind that learned that you could be in such a circumstance, right? And so then from then on, every supermarket is like, where are the booby traps and who's going to shoot at me? So I do think we're built for violent transitions, but one of them, what we are not built for is a treadmill where we are constantly facing. They're not quite as violent, but we are if you think about the difference between this world and the world pre-COVID and the world pre-Facebook, right? We keep going through these violent transitions. And what's more, it's like a treadmill on which some diabolical force is turning up the speed of it, right? The rate at which these violent transitions are coming at us is going up. And so I don't think there's any way to be we can be well adjusted to change. We can't be well adjusted to accelerating change with this much at stake. But your basic point, I think, is true, which is if your child is going to face that world, and you know that your child will, then you fall back to something else. And I actually, we don't know each other all that well, but I've certainly watched a lot of your podcast. I have a pretty good sense of who you are, and I'm very confident in your capacity to do this because you are highly conscious and very decent, right? Your values are good, but it's the highly conscious thing. Consciousness is the tool that we have for dealing with novelty, and you've got it in spades. So, your kid's going to face some stuff, but having a parent who has modeled that way of approaching it is about the best thing that they could have.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I am troubled by some of the, as you well know, this wouldn't exist if I wasn't troubled by many of the things that are happening in the modern world. But I think I've written a book called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, and I talk about this stuff a lot in the book. I go to Russia, I go to Ukraine. I speak to my grandmother in Ukraine. She's alive today, 96 or maybe pushing 97 years old now. You go talk to her, she's perfectly compos mentis. And she lived through the Holodomor, the gulags, exile, Nazi occupation, and on and on. The late Soviet Union, the transition from Soviet communism to modern society, the way it is now, the rapid advancement of technology. This is in one lifetime. And is my kid going to face as many problems as that? I hope not. And I don't know that they will, frankly. Living through several, several events that have killed millions of people in your country, a foreign invasion with genocidal maniac who's doing that. Those are things that may happen again, but they may not. So I think we get a little. I know the change of the pace of change feels very, very difficult at the moment, and I think the direction of travel has not been good. But I also think that we ought not to get carried away, because I look at comedy, for example. I don't do stand-up comedy anymore, but this was how I came into this world of the conversations we're having. And the pendulum is swinging back now in the comedy world. It went from, my heroes growing up with people like George Carlin and Bill Hicks, and they were pushing back, lefties pushing back against the religion of their day, which was religion, right? And that's why they made fun of Christians and all of that. We have a new religion now, and a few of us early on started to push back against that religion, and we got the same lumps. We had to take the same lumps that comedians before us had. And now I start to see the mainstream of the comedy world very slowly, but pivoting back towards realizing that if you want to be on the edge, if you want to be exciting, then you actually are going to have to start addressing this new cultishness that we've developed. So the pendulum will always swing. I am troubled by the direction that it's been going. I'm also very optimistic, Brett. And maybe this is just fatherhood speaking through me, and I have to be optimistic for the future now. I don't know. But I am less concerned than I've been in the last 5 or 6 years now than I have been ever, personally.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that, because although I vehemently disagree with you, I think it's a very important data point. In other words, if I'm trying to calibrate my own model, how confident am I in what I'm seeing? I know that you see things from a different perspective. I know you have a toolkit that was built under very different circumstances, and it's great to hear that you're optimistic. I hope you're right.
Yeah.
And I will say, I had a lovely conversation with Neil Oliver a couple days ago, and he said something that upgraded my model quite a bit, right? I was talking to him about the trajectory that I see, which is frankly quite alarming and dark. And he told me that he thought that it had been so long since the major tragedies of history, the events you refer to, in which millions died in particular places. And he said that he thought that because the current generation of tyrants is too far removed from that to have experienced it directly, that they've lost the ability to engage in that level of wet work. And I must say, I found something compelling about his formulation. Now, it doesn't bring me all the way to a hopeful state, because I think, I know it's not going to goose step, right? If you think that it's going to goose step into the room, you're going to miss it when it does arrive, because it's learned the lesson that it mustn't. But I also think that we are in an existential battle. That existential battle looks nothing like the battles of the past. Many of the tools are strangely reminiscent of the tools of the past, right? The degree to which Orwell is on target is almost ridiculous, right? Ministries of truth and, malinformation, these couldn't be more Orwellian if they tried. But nonetheless, I don't think it's going to look like those past tragedies. But it also, well, let's take one example just to put some flesh on the bones. There is a battle to prevent change, right? Those who have a disproportionate amount, some of which will have been earned through innovation, most of which will have been earned through rent seeking or worse. Those people always have an interest in thwarting change that they do not control, right? Because change can only reduce their position and their power. So they oppose change, right? What does one need to do to successfully oppose change? Well, in the past, you might need to go after huge numbers of people, right? The Stasi had to keep track of an incredibly large number of people. And so it needed basically to conscript your neighbors into spying on you. This thing has tools that the Stasi didn't have, right? So, for example, the ability to gather everything that we exchange electronically and bank it in Utah, right? What that allows them to do is it allows them not to pay attention to what you're saying. And then at the point that you become annoying, They can say, well, let's look at everything you said in the last 10 years. What's the most troubling thing the person has said? I call this retroactive surveillance, right? And so what it means is that the thing can leave most people alone. And it only has to exert pressure on the tiny number of people who are the sort of people who do create change, right? That's enough. It can be surgical. And so I don't want to go up against an enemy that can be so surgical that most people can be smug about pretending it doesn't exist because it's not going to come after them, right? That's a very dangerous world. And we're there already. So I sincerely hope that your optimism is well placed, and I hope you can ridicule me later.